Hello, welcome to the Sofa Series Artist Spotlight Part 2. Today we have with us Todd Moellenberg, who is an interdisciplinary artist, which means lots of things. Just to get us started, Todd, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where are you from? How good of an ice skater are you? And how did you get to come to California?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm excited and nervous to be interviewed.
It's totally
um,
normal. It's totally normal.
yeah, it's normal. It's normal these days. So I was born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona, and I went to school in Texas and Austin, and then I came to California for grad school. Uh, so Leslie asked this question about ice skating because my mother is a figure skating coach and my sister is a professional figure skater. In fact, she was taking these contracts on cruise ships like for the last few years that have ice rinks on them. But she's now in med school in,
Okay,
in the UK. Let's just make this interview about my sister. But she
let's.
had all these like friends that are stranded on cruise ships. Like they didn't actually let off the a lot of the staff even after they let the passengers off. So she had all these friends that have just been like stuck on boats,
Oh my
like
God.
wandering around
That is
like
an
the Gulf of
existentialist
Mexico.
nightmare. It's
Yeah,
the worst. Oh my God.
yeah.
Oh, well, luckily she is not stranded
No,
on a
she's
boat.
stranded in the UK, but I think she's doing okay. But yeah, so I'm not a figure skater. I can do basic moves, but I get like a lesson from my mom like every other year, and like I relearn how to do back crossovers.
Oh,
This is like
fancy.
my proudest accomplishment.
I can go forward.
Oh
So,
yeah. Good, without falling.
yeah, I can do that. So
So
you're here in California now. You're
I'm
in
here in
Los Angeles.
California. Yeah, I'm in Los Angeles. I'm in Pasadena to be specific, but not for much longer. I'll move back into the city in a few months. And in addition to being a figure skater, I am a pianist. So that's what I was in San Diego doing. And then as I was at UCSD, I just started working with a lot of visual artists and writers, and so my creative work, like in addition to being an interpreter of modernist music, as a pianist, I ventured into like poetry, and that led me to actually I don't remember the order, but like durational performance art, poetry, uh, and then like lately it's been video art. So my interests kind of stem from a maybe a concept, and then the medium is sort of the appropriate medium is used in order to uh, like pursue a line of thought regarding that specific concept. So that's kind of how I've been led to video art lately, and the work in the Sofa series is that
Great.
in addition to being musical.
Well, had you in your music performance and your piano practice before San Diego? I think for all of us that had gone to grad school in this like little pressure cooker, we all dabbled in a bunch of different things, and that was what is so unique I think about UCSD graduate program is that we're all kind of thrown together for however long you're there, and it's like this. It's a big playground. But had you ever explored any performance art? Had you been exposed to it? Any writing or any other kind of different modes of expression in your piano performance practice, or was it kind of after San Diego?
That's a good question. It was actually in San Diego that a lot of that came out. I weirdly like a lot of what I do reminds me of being a kid. Like
Mm,
reminds me of being like it taps into a part of my like brain and imagination that I was using so heavily when I was like 6 years old or something.
yeah.
But like through the years as a kid, I just like I had such a rigorous musical training. I was in a boys choir for like 7 years, and then of course I was uh, taking piano lessons, and so I kind of committed to a more like single-minded path by college, by undergrad. In an undergrad where I got into experimental music, and I think by going to San Diego, I already had sort of like the experimental interests in general, and then they became applied to various other mediums that I now work in.
Yeah, I had found the same exact situation was that I had like little windows into different modes of performance, but I had never considered it for myself until we were at UCSD, and I was like, oh, that's cool. I want to try that. That's cool. I want to try that. And you're like totally right. It's like very childish. It's very like novel and playful. But I wonder, like, we were talking about this yesterday with Jonathan, and I wonder for you as a pianist in the sort of rigor of piano performance practice, which is rigorous, it is intense. How did you come to contemporary music, experimental music, and was were your teachers encouraging of that? Was it a more kind of open music environment, or yeah, what was that like for you?
Yeah, good question. I it was really a personal interest of mine that like burgeoned in my undergrad. I had a wonderful teacher, Betty Mallard, as an undergrad, and she was just completely open-minded, but was definitely was a teacher of the classical repertoire, but wasn't limiting me. Probably was only worried that I was like doing too many projects all at the same time, like as she should have been. Um, but so she was just enthusiastic without, necessarily being a mentor directly with that
Mm-hmm.
repertoire. But one other thing you're mentioning, just about the rigor of being a pianist, like um, I definitely got interested in rigorous contemporary music. I like it took me a while to come around to ideas that didn't necessarily exploit virtuosity, even like in grad school. And the exposure to my peers, both in the music department and in other departments, really opened me up even more. But as far as a mentor is concerned, my teacher, who you also know at UCSD, Alec Karras, I mean, he was the one that really like taught me how to count and 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 like taught me to produce a beautiful tone, regardless of the repertoire I was playing. And even he had his boundaries in terms of interests. I mean, he
Mm-hmm.
was a mentor in a specific type of music making, and beyond that, I found other collaborators and colleagues as resources.
Yeah. What do you mean? I wonder if you can explain more about the exploiting virtuosity. That is like, I think, such a good way to put the sort of like performative practice of whatever instrument it is. Is that we want to, for the singers, we want all the high notes. Give me all the high notes all the time.
Mhm.
And for you, I want you to like, big flair and big finishes. And so, what do you mean about
Fast note.
music's? Yeah, yeah. We need the like razzle dazzle. So like, what do you mean by pieces that don't exploit virtuosity? What kind of work is that?
Um, Gosh, like as you asked that, I wonder if I've even like really escaped that mindset. like
Yeah.
like I'm thinking of like a really amazing concert length piece I did by Morton Feldman, Patterns in a Chromatic Field, that I got to do with a good friend, Judy Hammond. And but even that, I mean, so in that case, I mean, it's a 80-minute piece. It's dauntingly slow and spacious at times. Really can be really austere, but at the same time, I'm like have to subdivide the whole 80 minutes in my head. I mean, it's an exhausting enterprise.
So
Um,
maybe it's just like the virtuosity is not it's not so visible, right? It's
Maybe,
so internal, it's so in your body, it's so in your head the whole time doing the math as
yeah.
for 80 minutes straight. And then also just like the physical control, right? To make sure that your body is in the position it needs to be without it completely exhausting it. So it's a different kind of virtuosity. It's just not so flashy.
Yeah, but I mean, it's good that you're pointing it out, just because I think that mindset is sort of defining for me, at least still in my life. And so it's a way that I'm approaching any art making. I mean, like, I don't practice the number of hours that I used to, mostly
Mm-hmm.
because I mean, especially right now, like, the gigs have run dry. But I find that I'm sort of transposing that rigor of the practice room into like video making. So it's become this sort of like obsessive habit that I think is very much like resides in the same part of my brain as practicing the piano.
Oh, totally, totally, right? It's just like something that you can tunnel vision and dive into for
Yeah.
hours at a time. I don't think people quite realize that there's, in the music school, the opera students were always pissed off because the pianists were in every practice room all day, every day. They would just like live there the whole time and like, I need to sing my aria for like 5 minutes. Is it cool? We would like broker deals with the pianists and the string players too. Let's not forget them. But I think I like this idea of durational performance and just sort of like focusing on something so intensely for so long. Maybe can you talk a little bit about that side of your performance practice? How you went from like the concert stage to doing Enya's Only Time on Library Walk for an entire day. Can you talk a little bit about that transition?
Sure. I think well, I think it happened right like when I was developing that performance only time that I got obsessed with Bolero, that Ravel piece for orchestra, and just like the repetitive structure of it, like how it sort of arrives somewhere, but not through like an expected development. I mean, I just like became really fixated on that piece. And then I think I'd been collaborating with a good friend, Matt Savitsky, who was already a performance artist in his own right, and so was definitely influential in thinking about performance beyond music making. And so that idea of Only Time, I think, was sort of a convergence of those two things. And so I spent the entire day like like doing these improvisatory performances to the duration of that Enya song on these like raised platforms that line the path to the library at UCSD, and they're weirdly, I think there are 87 of them, which is like one off from the number of piano keys. And it also looks like with the rest of the walk, those raised platforms looks like a piano. So I think it's definitely like a wink to,
I had
yeah.
never even put that together. That is
But it was
so
a
good.
weird coincidence. I think I discovered that later, like as I was writing about it for my dissertation or something. But yeah, and so there's like in that performance, there's like that like rigor of durational performance and even of form
Mm-hmm.
there. Um, but within it, like these performances themselves were just like totally open to my surroundings. I was sort of like breaking character if someone was interrupting me.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like I was just sort of feeling it out as I went through the day, and it was such a transformative experience. I ended up doing it like I think at least 3 years in a row, like
Mm-hmm.
on around the same day in January. Um,
What do you
yeah,
what do you get from that? Like what? Yeah. What is the transformation for you?
it, yeah, it's really a personal transformation, almost an emotional transformation. I'm like I'm in an outfit that's not ordinary clothing. So like I have this like white face painted and this nude unitard that I'm wearing, and it like liberates me to act and respond to people in a way that I don't feel comfortable doing. So like it's actually like a day-long exploration of communication and interaction and like confrontation. Like, the cops will come, or like stupid people from like that are trying to manage like the price center, which is right by there, trying to get me to leave. Like I'm having to do these negotiations that are really high pressure during the day, that um also hostility among students, or like radical openness from them, like all these different really intense situations are just falling into my lap through doing it. And so just on a personal level, it was really um a learning experience for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um. So then, so then, So I want to also kind of like bring up your amazing like speech piano
Mm,
pieces, which I think those came before what you're doing now with
yeah.
the video work. So what is the speech and piano, and like how does it even work? I'm still like trying to figure
Right.
that out.
Yeah, so those are, so you're talking about the speech studies, which I was working on like the last year and the year before that. And so I'm using, so for that project, and this is like really different from Only Time.
Yeah.
It's like a couple steps away from it. Hard to, yeah, maybe draw a straight path there,
Yeah.
but like
Yeah.
the speech studies, I got really interested in automated voices like Siri. And at the same time, I was like studying to be bar mitzvah, like at 30.
Wait, really?
Yeah, yeah, that happened last year, and I was learning how to chant Hebrew, which is like my favorite thing, like
Wow.
to do as a hobby. Um, and so but I like got into like how automated voices, when they're really regular, they sound like chant, like
Uh-huh.
because the algorithm inflects it in these like using these very like layered and complicated, but like just almost predictable rules.
Hmm.
So I was feeding this app that is an automated voice app. I was like feeding it these phrases that are all scrambled and rearranged and repeat on and over and over. And then I was like transcribing the notes, like what the equivalent, the approximated piano pitch would be. And then I'd play at the same time as the automated voice.
Hmm.
So yeah, so that project took over my life for a really long time. And
But that
then,
is like so virtuosic too.
well,
Like
yeah,
I'm gonna figure out how to drop in a little video of it of what we're talking about, because it's so rapid fire, and the sequence of the syllables and the pitch range and sequence seems so random that it's just like what is he, how does he, huh? It's so cool. It's so cool. So I'll link to one of those videos so people can see. So how when did you sort of decide that platform was going to be your artistic expression or mode of expression?
yeah. So like, yeah, like you're indicating, those speech studies I was just posting as little videos on Instagram, like either on stories, or if they became longer and longer. So then I was just starting to like routinely post them to my Instagram feed. And I was basically like catering them to the time constraints of Instagram, the looping feature, like all those became like woven in. And it's just such like, aside from a lot of like these questionable problems about Facebook owning Instagram, um, it can be a really democratic way of distributing work, especially if you're not in the mindset of like gaining followers or something, like
Mm-hmm.
where that doesn't really overtake you in your mindset as you're producing this work. And so I I hadn't yet like fleshed out how I would perform them in concert. I liked them as really tiny fragments, and that lent itself really well to Instagram. And then I just realized I had a lot of exposure from doing that, and not like attempting to save it all for a concert that might never come. And
Would
then
you really consider that doing them all like in a
not all, they're like 300. It would, I think it would, everybody's brain would it would just be
a
totally,
bit
it
much, yeah.
would be torture. Yeah, but like some of them, I mean, I've had friends perform them in concert
Awesome.
now. um but yeah, so that kind of like pivoted me toward just really thinking about Instagram as a medium for like artistic distribution. And so yeah, so then like zooming a little bit forward, I that like those speech studies got me into an interest in Markov chains, which is the work that you showed at the in-person version of the SOFA series. And that kind of led me one step further into what I'm doing now. But both of those projects started using found like music videos and documentation of music. And again, because it was this video based medium, it was also really easy to just post them like I had been with the speech studies on Instagram.
What is a Markov chain?
A Markov chain is an algorithm that predicts the very next thing that's going to happen based on a pool of data that you feed the algorithm.
Okay.
And the other important thing about a Markov chain is that it has no memory. So it'll just make a statistically probable choice in its next move, but then the move after, it won't take into consideration what it did before.
Okay.
But Markov chains, I think, are used a lot in like machine learning and AI. And it often gives you the appearance that something is like actually understanding or learning, but it's actually just using a rather simple principle like that. In fact, one of the famous examples of a Markov chain is called the random walk, which is like you would choose to either move one step left, forward, right, or backwards. And you would just make a random choice every time, for every step. And that's actually apparently the way that an insect or specific insects move to map out a wide amount of territory for themselves. Just by doing that, they actually cover the largest surface area. It's the most efficient way to do that. So anyway, as you can tell, I got really into this idea. And so I was applying this to like pieces of music and like taking a movement of a Beethoven sonata and being like, okay, I'm going to feed the algorithm all the pitches of the melody. And then I'm going to have it just try to reconstruct the piece and just guessing, okay, well, there was this pitch. What's the most probable pitch to come after that? And then try to reconstruct it that way, which it of course fails to do, but has this like real uncanniness to it, especially in certain moments. And it still resembles the piece.
To be clear, my all-time favorite that you did of those is Uptown Girl. Is the
Oh,
whoa. It's like
that was funny.
it's so stressful. It's so good.
Okay. So, two thoughts about that. First off, like the other, like the sort of the secondary thing that made me think more about video, about that process is the way, like, then you see a performer like constantly jump cutting between different positions. And so the Uptown Girl one is not a Markov chain, but it came from it. It came from my interest in just what the video was doing and how to reorganize it and what that looks like visually. Uptown Girls is just organized like ascending pitch from that one riff he does for a while and then all the way back down. That's all it is.
That's all it is.
Right.
It is. The result is so stressful. It is so good. It's like he's going somewhere, and then he just never gets there, and there's no resolution, and it's just like,
Step by step.
oh, it's so good.
Which is
so
kind
good.
of like what these convergence studies do. They get closer and closer. These clips get closer and closer to each other, and then they sort of dissipate, or they arrive and it starts over, or something.
Yeah, right. It's like on Reddit, there's like a subreddit about like gifs that end too soon, or screams that are cut too soon.
Yeah. follow one of those perfectly cut screens on
That's
Twitter.
the one. I love that one.
So good.
So
Yeah,
stupid, but so good.
yeah.
So then here we go. Segue. How did you come to these convergent studies, and why? How do you choose what you choose, and how are you employing a canon? And yeah, what's the
Sure.
point?
Oh God. Okay. Well, I haven't gotten there yet, as I never never do. At least it takes me a really long time. Um,
Fair.
like I know it's right, and I also just love it. Just gives me so much joy. I'm like creating them for my own like ear to listen to.
Uh-huh.
But uh, lately, I have been thinking just about direct musical influences, like the Ravel with Only Time. There was another phase of my practice where I got really interested in this French modernist Jean Barraquet, and for these, it really is Conlon Nancarrow, who some of you might know this other composer Ligeti a little bit more familiarly, but Nancarrow was a little bit earlier than Ligeti and was a really huge influence on him, and he was writing basically what I'm writing.
Mhm.
In fact, I did a lot of my qualifying exams about him. But he's basically he would write these melodies himself, and then he'd replay them at different speeds until and start the faster ones late enough so that they would all converge at a certain point. And he'd write all of his music for player piano, and he was like an expat that lived in
Mhm.
Mexico City. So that premise has always been real striking for me. I mean, Ligeti borrowed it, stole it, like used it all over the place, especially in his later work. And what was so exciting about this idea is applying it to video, because it does two different things. One thing is when you change the speed of a video and you don't like protect the pitch range that it originally was, it'll make it higher or lower.
Right.
And so I figured out how to manipulate the speed so I get exactly the pitch I want, like how high it is. And that's not something that Nancarrow really did. He sort of arbitrarily chose the
Yeah.
other voices' pitches, but this is actually really in line with just playback speed.
Mm.
Um, and the second way that I feel like I'm sort of expanding on Nancarrow's idea is just in the visual, is that if I divide the frame in certain ways, you're actually seeing visually how the composite of the music video lines up and then disperses again,
Mm.
if it does diverge after that point. So I got really invested in that idea. And then another part of your question was just about like how I choose what I choose. A lot of it is just like my musical taste and like what I already listen to. It's usually that. And then I have to think about things like density, like certain music, just if it's too layered, is not going to sound like anything. So
Mm.
I'm constantly just like sort of refining what works in the system day to day. And it's really, I make so many of these, and that I do post, and I make almost maybe like the same amount that I don't, because I'm just experimenting and cycling through. But I sort of roam around. I sort of explore a genre for a few days and then sort of move on, and then maybe like circle back around.
Yeah.
I always have new ideas about how to divide the frame and how to exploit that idea just visually. So right now I'm just sort of deep, like entrenched in the experimentation process, which is partially why it's hard for me to really tell you the point. But I think the ones that I chose for the Sofa series, I mean, there were sort of three metrics that I had for them. One is that I really like wanted them to sound good, like sound interesting
Yeah.
enough, like through and through. I wanted them to look interesting. These are like really aesthetic, sort of
Yeah.
superficial choices, but
But
I have
valid.
ones
Yeah.
that succeed on one and not the other. So I wanted those two. And then the third, which is the most elusive, which maybe gets closest to your question, is just, does the visual or the lyrics or whatever is happening in the music, does it construct some like extra meaning about that itself is reflexive to the music and the music video? So for instance, and like I feel a little weird elaborating, but I've drunk a lot of coffee. Because I'm like about to tell you like what you should look for in these videos.
Right,
But
you're like, yeah, give
okay,
me the
so here's
look.
an example because I got really excited about this one. The fourth video is me doing a lip sync to the Andrews Sisters' "Don't Fence Me In,"
It's my favorite.
and that one is like became really personally meaningful and sort of like a light bulb for me because what I was noticing is the way that I'm organizing the fragments of the frame that kind of pass through the screen as the video progresses. It looks like a fence.
Yeah.
And so like then the song is "Don't Fence Me In," so there became this like reflexive thing, like the whole thing was pointing to itself in circles. And then it's also just like, maybe my favorite ones these days, because this project feels a little diaristic, is just how it's sort of commenting on being in quarantine. And so that one, I think out of the four, maybe Landslide does something similar.
Yeah.
Achieved those three metrics.
Yeah.
It looked good, it sounded good, and it like has this extra layer of commentary about what's going on just by looking and listening to it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's the what I am responding to the most, but especially it's um like in Landslide, I get very voice nerdy about Stevie Nicks in general because she just like does not sound like a human lady.
I know
You
it's
know.
unreal. And like that's later, much later than she recorded that piece.
Right, right. It's so like her the actual voice still somehow feels manipulated even though it's a live recording, you know?
Same.
Like, what?
That's
What have you
funny.
done?
That's funny. I just did a Imogen Heap one because like I mean like she's like legit altering her voice, but
Right, right. Oh man. So that one is just mesmerizing for me as a singer. I'm just watching it over and over and again, and I can't decide which I like the most, the really, really deep kind of molasses Stevie Nicks or the like kind of frenetic Stevie Nicks that kind of sounds more human. You know?
right.
It's just like this amazing happy accident that happens in these types of convergence things that are just so good.
And that like that looping is sort of like just personally is addictive. Like you get to the end of it and it just leads right back to the beginning. So you're just like you can find yourself just watching that.
It's like, here we go. Just have it on in the background.
Yeah.
Make my scrambled eggs. Yeah.
My boyfriend Michael was like telling me something about them, like especially early on when I was making them, they remind him of the news, in this way that like they like
Yes.
cycle around and it feels like you're adding input, like you're adding information, but there's actually no development.
Nothing.
I'm just layering the same thing on top of itself. It's just at a higher speed and
And
pitch.
with a faster graphic and or with like a flashier image or with the crawl and the like, yeah, it's like all of
Right.
these different visual elements of what our news has become.
Yeah. And then, but
That's
it's like,
fascinating.
but then you like want to start it all over. Like it's like it has this like color and addictiveness to it that like just sucks you right back in,
Yeah.
as if you're going to find something else
Yeah.
and you don't,
You
or
just
like
don't.
maybe you do, but
But you don't.
I like that. I like that impression. It like made
It's
sense
really
about
fun.
right now.
Oh, Michael, he's so smart.
I know.
Yeah, yeah. So is this your kind of your main focus, especially through the quarantine? Or are you going in different directions? Are you exploring more modes of
Um,
expression?
gosh, that's like also like wing on like what's the phrase, like wing on a prayer, wing on a is,
Wing and a prayer? Wing on, wing
wing on.
and.
I like wing on a prayer. The angels. No, like I'm sure you know this, but like when you're making experimental work, you don't ever like know what the next phase is going to be, like
Yeah,
the next big idea is going to
yeah.
be. I always get kind of carried there, but like, and I've been very lucky that I've like gone through unending phases of work and new concepts to explore. But yeah, I mean, the next one's not clear. I always kind of think the project's over like halfway through, so I
Mhm.
think I have a ways to go with them. But in the meantime, like I mostly work in tiny forms, and then we'll generate bigger ideas. So I have some fuller length versions of these, but in addition, I'm sort of like still trying to wrap up. I wrapped up a full-length Markov chain piece for piano that was 4 hours long that I premiered on Instagram Live at the first week of quarantine.
Whoa.
Which was uses that Markov thing I was like struggling to describe, but using random pitches on the piano until it sort of condenses into a very small pattern. So I wrap that up. There's a violin equivalent that I'm writing for Eric Carlson. So I'm trying to finish that. And then this pianist in New York, Conrad Tao, is going to perform some of the speech studies for some online concert in a few weeks. So I'm like working with him. I had to like go. So that's like the other big thing actually, is that I'm trying to like archive like those 300 pieces, which I never did because I just moved on to the next thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
That's daunting. That's a big pile of work,
yeah,
but good.
really fun.
That's good.
Really good like opportunity provided by isolation at least.
Oh God, thanks COVID-19.
Yeah, God.
Oh man, oh man. How are you holding up emotionally and all of that through this? Is this keeping your brain sharp from going into the existential dread of what all of this means?
Um, yeah, I feel pretty stable. I do live alone, so like human touch would be nice. It's been
Mm,
like 5 weeks since then. I think I'm find that a lot. And you're just with your own thoughts
hmm
all day, and sometimes Zoom is great, like reaching out to friends and all that, but like you sometimes lose perspective. So I think especially like in the throes of this work where I just get really sucked in and it like carries me through the day, I can really lose track.
hmm
But in general, I thrive on isolation. So just in the abstract, I mean, it's a wonderful opportunity, but of
hmm
course I'm like looking forward to us all getting back out there and like being in community with each other again
Yeah.
when it's like absolutely the right time to do.
Absolutely the right time. Let's be very clear about that.
Yeah.
No sooner. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking with me, Todd. It's nice to see your lovely face and your full beard. You're
I
so
look like such a
sweet.
Jew.
You are.
It was really nice to talk to you. It was
All right.
fun. I mean, it's so helpful just for my own like sense of perspective.
Yeah.
So
Oh, good.
thanks
I'm
for talking about it
glad.
with me and sharing it with the world. Just really
Happy
appreciate
to.
it.
I'm happy to. So thank you so much. And Sofa series devotees, keep tuning in. We'll have more as this thing progresses. So thank you, Todd. Talk